Is a really important story and kind of topic to cover. This just bullshit fabrication that people are so certain. It seems like that this lab leak theory is actually credible. So this is from Alex Rubinstein. I definitely check him out on Substack. Lab leak theory mainstreamed by journalistic frauds who love war. And again, even a lot of people on the so-called left, progressives like fucking liberal hack Jon Stewart, are parroting this bullshit. Which again, I think a big part of it, why this has become more mainstream, is because it allows the United States completely off the hook for how just abysmally they handled this pandemic. 600 plus thousand dead. I believe we have the most COVID-19 cases in the world, and yet all these other countries with a lot less, resources and wealth, Cuba is one example, have handled it amazingly. So I think part of it is a distraction from this, and most of the people who watch my videos don't subscribe. Please subscribe. It helps get this message out to more people. This anti-imperialist, communist viewpoint. So please subscribe. It helps out. After more than a year of media holding it in utter disesteem, which is true, disesteem, the theory that COVID-19 came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China, has been picking up steam. It's true. It's definitely, from what I come to that same conclusion for what I've seen going on. Now that the dust has settled, Trump is no longer president, and the U.S. has demonstrably handled the virus poorly. Completely true. Need for a new scapegoat has arisen. Yep. And China is the perfect pretend culprit. This narrative's power has the potential to ignite major conflict between the world's greatest two powers. Comparison to Iraq's non-existent WMDs have been made by both critics and promoters of the lab leak theory. While this theory's with the theory's power, it is understandable that it was less popular under Trump for many, as the liberal elite of the U.S. saw him as an unqualified steward of their empire. As the U.S. begins to recover from this economic and health calamity, its desire for retrospection increases, but rather than focus on the failure of the U.S. authorities, which obviously where it should fucking be directed, because again, this isn't going to be something of the past. These types of pandemics are going to continue to happen in the future, instead of maybe, instituting Medicare for all, making sure everybody has access to fucking healthcare. Probably important during a pandemic, right? Which have overseen more than 600,000 deaths from the coronavirus, nearly 130 times greater than deaths in China, despite its smaller population. Again, there's over a billion plus people in China. The U.S. government and foreign policy hawks are seeking to use the origin of the virus as yet another cudgel against China in the new Cold War, not nude. Thus, the emergence of a not-so-novel narrative, despite the non-emergence of new tangible evidence. China is what killed many good Americans, men and women. While we are no longer in the war on terror, we are in another WMD scenario. It's an even more potentially powerful narrative because the lab leak theory fits nicely in the new foreign policy doctrine in the United States' great power competition. These unique factors have primed the public to seek better answers to questions about what led to mass housing uncertainty, widespread unemployment, the collapse of small business, and the death of education for more than a year. Yes, it's all fucking China's fault. But their Virgil in this hellscape is feeding them fake tales of boogeyman. There are two main variants of lab leak theory, one in which China's incompetence is to blame, and another in which it's China's malfeasance. So either their incompetence or they, did it on purpose, basically. The first strain of thought, pun intended maybe, is that the virus was unleashed on the world following an accidental leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the second that it was a deliberately discharged bioweapon from the villainous CPC. whether the virus was accidentally leaked and there was a cover-up, or whether it was made by a man and unleashed on purpose, the message of the lab leak theory is clear. China is the bad guy. It's all their fault. Theoretically speaking, if COVID-19 was a genetically engineered bioweapon, it's not a very effective one with a mortality rate in the single-digit range. Scientifically speaking, it's not appropriate to completely discount any potential origin theory. But again, a lot of these people are making the claim that, well, this for sure, it's China's fault. It came out of this. It's all their fucking fault that all these bad things happened in the U.S. But this is not a scientific debate. It's an information war being fought between two superpowers. Many of the main promoters of the Wuhan lab leak have well-documented records of pushing disinformation that benefits the U.S. gov's agenda. And so a supposedly scientific debate is, in essence, not a scientific debate, but a theory alleging a conspiracy. I believe there's a term for this, conspiracy theory, that is being weaponized against a strategic foe of the U.S. They would therefore serve the American public to be critical of the motives driving coverage of the lab leak theory, or risk being dragged further into confrontation. Origins of the lab leak theory. Not take long for lab leak theory to get mainstream attention, even if dismissive in the beginning. Former Secretary of State, war criminal, real piece of shit. Another war criminal, Donald Trump, Senator Tom Cotton, piece of shit as well, who even prior to any confirmed cases of the coronavirus was branding China as an evil empire. Fun fact, China eliminated extreme poverty recently. Good job, China. Were the first politician to promote the idea. Cotton first raised the lab leak theory with an allusion at the Senate Armed Services Committee in January 2020. Quote, Wuhan has China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that works with the world's most deadly pathogens to include, yes, coronavirus, he said. Cotton has since called for economic war in China. Less than a month prior, the first accusation that the virus was created by China had appeared on the internet, according to Washington Post. A British Hong Konger who calls for Hong Kong independence and labels the mainland government Nazis tweeted that the evil regime strikes again. First U.S. pub to report on the lab leak theory is Washington Times, a right-wing paper founded by the South Korean Unification Church and anti-communist cult. To understand the significance of the Wuhan lab, the Washington Times noted Radio Free Asia, created by the CIA, as he points out, had the week prior rebroadcast a report declaring the Wuhan lab the only lab in China capable of working of the deadly virus. Josh Rogan, self-proclaimed neoliberal, fucking trash, who has called for the assassination of foreign leaders through his column at WAPO, still spills most of his ink attacking foreign governments that are considered enemies of the U.S. and has consistently published the lab leak theory for the paper. Rogan denied a media firestorm from both liberals and conservatives alike when he reported on a documentary seemingly or selectively leaked to him by U.S. authorities, which, again, any documents that are coming from U.S. authorities, there's going to be a reason they're leaking that shit. Again, to take away any type of culpability, responsibility from the U.S.'s abject failure on this and to try to blame it on anybody, in this case, China. Which said there was a staff shortage at the Wuhan lab. Critically, the diplomatic cables do not suggest the lab's research on bat coronavirus posed any threat. Nonetheless, Rogan ran with the headline, State Department cables warned of safety issues at Wuhan lab studying bat coronavirus. The Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal has chronicled Rogan's history relying on intelligence sources, something you never want to do, some of which have proven completely false. Wall Street Journal series has been published by Michael R. Gordon, who relied solely on U.S. intelligence reports and anonymous current and former intelligence officials for an article claiming workers of the lab grew sick in November 2019. By allowing them to remain anonymous, intelligence officials are given free space from journalists to launder propaganda through the press without fear of repercussion, should their narratives prove false. China's top coronavirus scientist lab has also disputed this claim. Previously, here you go, Gordon co-bylined the famous New York Times article with Judith Miller in 2002 that claimed Saddam Hussein was seeking materials to build weapons of mass destruction. Article widely credited, Jesus, slow down, for lying the American public into war with Iraq. That article has also relied heavily on intelligence sources. You see why Rubenstein calls these people journalistic frauds? Because they are. No, no fucking journalistic integrity to their name. Meanwhile, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists also made waves publishing the lab leak theory through science writer Nicholas Wade, who's authored a book promoting racist eugenics titled Troublesome Inheritance. Jesus. Through this article on a Medium blog, Wade has now single-handedly popularized the gain of function narrative, which amounts to the singular scientific claim underpinning the lab leak theory, despite it being disputed whether the grant to the Wuhan lab in question actually funded such research. These key nodes in the information pipeline, pushed by writers with dubious agendas, have propelled the lab leak theory from being considered a fever dream of the far right to being dubbed credible by legacy newspapers and advertisements that are paying to promote. So right there. Now, a whopping 58% of Americans believe the virus came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the theory continues to rack up new endorsements from mainstream voices. It's likely that number will grow. I'm not one of those people. Hope you aren't either. At least, if anything, don't be certain of it, because there's no fucking credible evidence that it came from this lab. And again, the media, the U.S. government, has a vested interest in taking away their responsibility for this, again, utter failure. 600 fucking thousand dead. 130 times more people died in the U.S. than China as a result of this. Focus on that. That's where the focus should be. What did we do? How did we fuck up so bad? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? But that's not what we're talking about right now. It's this fucking lab leak theory bullshit. Demonstrating the viral potential among a public keen on revenge over the catastrophic virus, liberal Paragon and eponymous former host, I'm going to have to Google what that means, host of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, threw his weight behind the lab leak theory, calling the virus more than likely caused by science. In an interview with his former sidekick Stephen Colbert in his nightly news show. That clip has now more than 5.5 million views. There's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Stewart quipped. Maybe it's the fucking chocolate factory. The clip began with Stewart praising scientists, but quickly devolved into a mockery of science when Stewart made an absurd summary of natural origin theories. Maybe a bat flew in the cloaca of a turkey and then it sneezed into my chili. What the fuck? Ignoring scientific basics. Most deadly viruses in human history have affected humans through animal transmission. The bubonic plague, rats, right? 1918 influenza epidemic, swine flu in 2009, Ebola, HIV, the list goes on. Stewart, like the overwhelming majority of media figures, also ignored evidence that the virus did not even come from Wuhan, even if the city is the site of the first epidemic in December 2019. Again, all of these sources, going to get into this, Rubenstein will show that the virus supposedly came from this Wuhan lab, either accidentally or purposely, was present in other parts of the world before it supposedly leaked from this Wuhan lab. Pretty important to talk about that, right? Studies by the medical journal Lancet, very prestigious medical journal, another one by the WHO, say the first onset of symptoms of COVID-19 occurred in early December 2019. Studies conducted in March 2020, May 2020, September 2020, and most recently March 2021 estimate that the virus was first born in either October or November of 2019. Remember that Michael Gordon smoking gun is Wuhan lab staff in November that year. So October, that's before that. Had the virus come from the Wuhan Institute, this timeline is tough to reconcile with the study from Italy, which showed the virus was circulating there in September 2019, 2 months before it supposedly was leaked, again accidentally or on purpose, from the Wuhan lab. Findings of the virus in human sewage in Brazil in November 2019. and antibodies in American citizens that indicate the virus is spreading in the United States in December. The first known case of coronavirus was discovered on December 8th in Wuhan. Kind of problematic. How are you going to reconcile that if it came from the lab? Even more odds with the lab leak theory is the finding of COVID-19 traces in sewage samples from March 2019 in Spain, well before the virus is alleged to have emerged in China. Meanwhile, the closest virus to COVID-19 that was studied at the Wuhan Institute shares only 96% of its genomes with the pandemic virus. To put that in perspective, humans and chimpanzees share 98.8% of their DNA. Maybe our genome is more complex than the virus, but small percentage points matter a lot. Completely. Again, we share 98% of our DNA with chimps, but we're still, quite a bit different than chimpanzees in, a number of ways. While most have chosen to ignore this conflicting data, some have not fully endorsed the lab leak theory, opting instead to push a line that they're just asking questions and that all options should be explored. If that's the case, there are other origin theories which are being conveniently ignored. Double standard of the debate. Lab leak theory promoters point to reports by Josh Rogan, Michael Gordon, which relied on U.S. intelligence. We'll get into this. Is also going to get into why that's also problematic, because it could have been released by fucking U.S. government itself. That claim researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology went to the hospital in November 2019 with flu-like symptoms. The U.S. diplomats who visited the lab in 2018 warned of inadequate safety at the lab. These are the main pillars of lab leak theory, so it's ironic that they're more or less present in the under-discussed theory that may have come from the U.S., which some Chinese officials have suggested. The U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases in Fort Detrick, Maryland, was forcibly shut down in August 2019 due to safety concerns. This is a slim location where the U.S. based its bioweapons program until the famously honest President Richard Nixon stood in front of it in 1989 to promise the United States would never engage in biological warfare. That's obviously, it's being sarcastic, the famously honest. It's also where the AIM strain of anthrax, which is a strain that caused anthrax scare in 2001, was first studied. July 2019, a retirement community less than an hour away experienced what local media called a mysterious respiratory virus that infected 63 people and killed 3. Meanwhile, the Wuhan military games in October 2019 drew military athletes from 140 countries, including the U.S. Fort Detrick leak theorists suggest that the virus may have entered Wuhan that way. See, again, why are they not discussing this potential lab leak that came, from Fort Detrick, Maryland, and focusing on Wuhan? As we can see, the pillars of the Wuhan lab theory are also present in the Fort Detrick theory, yet has been totally ignored by mainstream writers and the U.S. government. White House has told the media that there are no credible reasons to investigate the Fort Detrick origin story, yet has tasked the intelligence community with investigating Wuhan lab theory. Pretty convenient. Nothing to see here. It didn't come from our lab, even though, there's some kind of weird things going on. Maybe we should look into that. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to, place all the blame, all the eggs in the basket that it, came from the Wuhan lab. Is tasked the intelligence community investigating the Wuhan lab theory, not the NIH, not the NASA. Yeah, again, like the fucking intelligence community, like they don't have a vested interest in this fucking narrative and increasing tension so they can continue to get massive amounts of money for this new fucking Cold War, Yeah, the WHO, which is already investigating, called the lab leak theory extremely unlikely, but no, the intelligence community, they're going to come up with a unbiased, report on this. So was it China or the U.S. that is responsible for the coronavirus? Personally, I think the answer is neither, but if I had to pick one, it'd be the country that was using biological warfare with smallpox-infected blankets before it even became a country. It's obviously the U.S. which is a pretty dark history of testing bioweapons on non-military pops. This theory may make the U.S. look comically villainous to some, and it may be flawed, but it's worth remembering how the White House under George W. Bush claimed, quote, Iraq is seeking to purchase chemical weapon agent precursors, applicable production equipment, and is making an effort to hide activities at the Fallujah plant, which was one of Iraq's chemical weapons production facilities before the Gulf War, only then to invade the country and deploy white phosphorus, a chemical weapon, over the city of Fallujah. Sounds a little bit similar, right, to what's going on here. But as the lab leak theory reaches a fever pitch, scientists are increasingly warning that such talk is getting in the way of international cooperation in the response to the pandemic and inciting racial hatred towards Asian Americans. During the first Cold War, the KGB promoted the idea that HIV was created at Fort Detrick. They did this because of an effective part of a hybrid warfare against the U.S. It's not the same reason the U.S. government. It's for the same reason that the U.S. Gov and its obedient press are promoting the lab leak theory. Information warfare may not be a new phenomenon, but as the U.S. public grows more wary of conventional warfare, it is playing an ever more present role in international relations. For to avoid senseless confrontation that can only benefit the ruling elite, it's imperative we be critical of the shady cast of characters hyping up unproven allegations against other world powers, regardless of how sexy the headlines may be. Boom, there you go. And then I wanted to click this, because this is the first time I've heard about this Fort Detrick stuff. I'm assuming it probably is for you as well. Where do we go here? Shut down. Here we go. See what this is. Three dead. New total. Fuck this, Ben Bridge. Fuck you. Get out of here, you piece of shit. I don't want this. Fuck off. Fuck off, Ben Bridge. Three dead. New toll. Sickened individuals reported at Green Spring Retirement Community. Mysterious illness. Now, again, this was July 2019. Respiratory illnesses. Upper respiratory illness. That's what COVID affects, right? Pretty interesting. Retirement community less than an hour away from Fort Detrick. Again, you're not hearing any talk about that aspect of a potential lab leak theory emanating from the U.S., right? No, it's the boogeyman. It's China. Came from this Wuhan lab. Then there's this World Military Games. So again, it could have been brought over by the U.S. to China at this point. So again, I think it's just really important to have a very critical, discerning lens when you're getting fed this narrative by, these fucking corporate media hacks. Again, they're not journalists. They have no type of journalistic integrity whatsoever. I think that's Rogan and Gordon, or maybe vice versa. But I mean, yeah, just use a critical lens. It's perhaps, possible that it came from a lab, but it seems more than likely that it did originate, from an animal, bats in this case, I think. But again, just don't take the shit that you're getting peddled by the corporate media, by the U.S. government, hook, line, and sinker, when it serves their interest to make you believe in these things. That's what I would caution. What say you? Like the video if you like the damn video. Subscribe for more content. All power to the people. Peace. Much love.